tardes. Es un gusto poder presentar hoy este trabajo de Kenneth Emmerich y Noemí Echeverría. Un trabajo reciente que se acaba de publicar, que está por aparecer en papel. Creo que todavía está en forma digital solamente, o ya tenemos el... Oh, ya aparece. Excelente.
Ya apareció justo en septiembre. A 15 de septiembre ya.
Ya está en papel también. Sí, claro. Perfecto. Buenísimo que salió por Brill. Lo único malo es que Brill es un poco caro, pero... pero, sí, excelente, sí. Pero bueno, yo no voy a hacer la presentación, solamente agradecer que estén aquí. Creo que aparte del público que tenemos presencialmente, habrá público también conectado por vía remota, así es que hay de qué emocionarnos. Y luego esto queda en la red, entonces sí, también...
lo pueden ya consultar.
Exacto. Y nada, no sé, bueno, tanto Kenneth como Noemí trabajan en la Universidad Libre en Bruselas, y Diana Fuentes, que va a comentar después de la presentación que van a hacer Kenneth y Noemí, Diana va a hacer algunos comentarios. Diana es filósofa por la UNAM y por otras universidades. Y trabaja en la Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana Campus Xochimilco. Y bueno, nada, esto supongo que una parte va a ser en español, otra parte va a ser en inglés.
Sí, en inglés y ya algunas cosas en español, sí, necesita más contextualización.
De acuerdo. Bueno, entonces, pues muchas gracias a todas y todos. Y bueno, pues adelante.
Hello everyone. So we're going to present this book published by Brill in a series that is dedicated to book history, especially here about the industrial world. The book was initially not meant as a book. It was meant as a part of a series of articles, and we published an article in Quarendo, and we got the invitation of the editor to make a book project, and this is the result of that project. So the presentation will look as follows. So we will make an overview of the book. We will then focus on chapter 6 of the book. We will reproduce the whole research process that is presented in that specific chapter, and then we'll also deal about the current Spanish translations of Capital Volume 1, and especially in light of Chapter 6. I would like also to say if there are questions or issues or whatever, you can always just raise your hand and ask in Spanish, English, any other language that we can talk, we can speak, understand. First of all, you can present...
the contents of the book. Maybe before we move forward, we would like to really thank both Gilberto Conde for organizing this event, and Juan Carlos Castillo also for being the contact to be able to present our book here in the Colmex. So as Kenneth said, today we are going to focus on a specific chapter, but we are going to give an overview of the different chapters of the book. So basically we have 5 chapters in this book. We have the introduction, and then we go into reproduce the first how initiate the publication of the French edition of Capital, which is the focus of this book. Then we reconstructed the publishing process of the different series of the book. And finally, we go also into the discussion of what are the different views of both Karl Marx and Engels on specifically the French edition of Das Kapital, and a conclusion. So that will be the overview of the book. Maybe, Kenneth, you want to continue with which sources we use?
Yes, first of all, the book is constructed. The book is constructed fully in a chronological way. The later chapter 6 is is like more like a thematic, and we use in the book we use all the primary sources that are available to construct the publishing process, which is the writing, the translating, the publishing, printing, everything around the book, how it can come out, how it can be published and be sold. And to construct this specific process, we use unpublished German, French, and English sources. Really recently, a number of letters were rediscovered or discovered by someone called François Godin in his book Traduire le Capital, une correspondance inédite entre Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels et l'éditeur Maurice Lachatre. Was recently found in 2019. He presented us with color scans. Really intelligent that he did that, because we can also then see the original sources. And there's also more recently, Laurent Baronien and Nicolas Riesseau with pièces inédites de Marx, lettres et projets de contrat pour la publication française du Capital. And they also published new letters that were sold in France in an auction. They were sold. And I asked the two authors to receive also the scans of these letters, and I received them. Besides that, I collected all the primary sources. I saw them all in visual format, all the other sources that around these specific new sources to reconstruct the publishing process. We checked all of them that were available. Amongst those sources are biographical testimonies and other documents of the period that we will also discuss in the presentation. For example, the publishing contract of Le Capital that was published by Godin, for example. And also we went to the British Library, the Register of Donations. Really important to know when Marx donated parts of the French edition, so we can more or less reconstruct thanks to also the other sources when the book was published, or the series of the book were published. So this was actually what we use, and all the archives that we used. The most important one is, of course, the International Institute of Social History in Amsterdam. Without them, the book was not possible. Really helpful people. It's really, if you're in Amsterdam and you're interested in social history, try to visit. They have many sources. Also, they have a digital collection. You can surf to the website, and you see many other sources of other figures. And besides that, we also contacted the Russian State Archive of Socio-Political History in Moscow, Regaspeed, and then we also got the sources that we wanted for the book. The Public Library in New York has an important collection of Friedrich Adolf Sorge. He received letters from Engels and Marx, and he had his own copy also received, and documents. It was also, you can also visit it and see that. And the Paul Lafarge archive in Paris, also important. There's some interesting materials that we used. And for the appendix, we have in the appendix we describe a specific copy that Marx, well, part of it was sent by Marx to a person called Hector Denis in l'Institut Émile van der Velde in Brussels. That was kind of the start of the book project, because we saw that there were more changes in the book than documented, but that's now in the appendix. So we visit that also. And besides that, we received material of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in Germany, Musée de l'Histoire Vivante in Montreal, Verein für Geschichte der Arbeiterinnenbewegung in Vienna, and on the British Library in London. And there was an interesting copy of the German second edition in the Senate House Library in London. Just to give you more like an overview, of which were the versions that Marx published in his lifetime. He published 4 different versions. First of all, after a long process of research and writing and manuscripts and lots of thinking and research, he published in 1867 the first edition, the first German edition of Das Kapital in Hamburg with Otto Meissner. This is a photo of a copy of the Staatsbibliothek in Berlin. And then he published a Russian version in 1872 in St. Petersburg. And this is a copy of the University of Chicago. Then he published the second German edition in 1872. It was also in parts. People sometimes say it was one book edition. It's not true. It's in different parts, in fewer parts, but bigger parts than the French edition. It was in 72, 73, and finally the book was published in 73. He called it the zweite verbesserde Auflage, so he found it an improved edition. This copy is also, the photo is also from the library in Berlin. Then finally he had this French version that was described as a translation by Roy and completely revised by the author, as it was set in the first series of the publication, because that was also in several parts. We will discuss that also when they were published. So this is a photo of like an engraving that was put in the book. We recently also showed it in the title page. There were 2 title pages. This was another title page. And this is a copy of University of Rome. It's basically actually showing a place in Rome, this engraving.
So what is important, or what we wanted to highlight, is that by studying the publishing process of Le Capital, of the French edition of Capital, we also are kind of approaching how Marx developed his work. And what we see here is that it's not the idea of the single author like writing and publishing, but rather there is family endeavor, the publishing process, at least from the Le Capital is really clear. So we have Marx, that is the author, residing in London. We also see that because Marx was residing in London and the other people that were involved in the publishing process, in the printing and the edition, were living somewhere else, then this became a transnational endeavor in the sense that, for example, Joseph Brault, the translator, lived in Bordeaux in France. Maurice Lachatre, because was the editor, he was from France, but because the Paris Commune took place some years before, then he went as a refugee to live in Spain, Belgium, and Switzerland. And therefore, we see that there is the need of communication and coordination across borders between the different people that will be involved in the publication process. We also have the people that actually were in Paris from the editor's company, Bernoulli and Adolphe Derbeau. We have the printer, Lahour in Paris, and Adolphe Quest, there is a court-appointed administrator, that this is a way of like overseeing the publication process that was appointed by the French government after the Paris Commune. And as I said, these were the official people involved, and sometimes in the reconstruction of the publishing process, there is mentioning, of course, of the editor, of the translator, and the author, but then they forget sometimes to elaborate on what is the involvement of the other people in the editor's company. And also, much more importantly, what I already highlighted, the fact that this is a family endeavor, the fact that Marx was always in contact with, first of all, Friedrich Engels, his friend, to discuss the book and the content, but also the publishing process, as well as from the evidence that we have, both Jenny Marx, the mother and the daughter, which were involved in translations, but also just in the general publishing process. Paul Lafarge, that was the husband of the daughter of Marx, Laura Marx, Eleanor Marx, that are the other two daughters of Marx, and Charles Longuet, that also was one of the husband of one of the daughters. So all of them took part. This could be by proofreading the manuscripts, or by writing letters to people, because sometimes Marx didn't have time. Also, we will see he was also very sick at some points. So this gives a much more nuanced picture of how Karl Marx produced his work. Then I think
yeah,
you can continue.
The book itself was published in several installments, more specifically in 44 installments, and they were arranged in series. And you can actually identify them if you want to identify them. If you have a copy of the French edition, you can easily see it in the right corner. You see there is a tree. That means that's the start of the third series, and every series is delimited like this. And you can then see how many per series were 5. I will show it later why there were always 5. You can identify them. So that's just to know, if you have a copy of the French edition, you can identify the series. It was published in several series. So the first series of 5 installments, so installment 1 to 5. I'm just focusing on this specific thing, because there's in the literature sometimes said it was published from August 1872 until May 1875. That's not true. It was September until November 75. And that's important to know when it was finished and when it started. So here I'm just showing you a couple of letters just to prove that it was on 17 and 18 September of 1872, the first 40 pages of the book. So every installment had 8 pages, so 5 installments, 40 pages. And here you see the first letter. This is the handwriting of the editor, Maurice Lachâtre. Il dit: ayez la bonté de transmettre sans retard cette autorisation afin que nous puissions mettre en vente le plus tôt possible la première série du Capital. And then he speaks about the 5 installments. There's the first letter that's from 13 August. And then the second one is from 19 October. The series was already published. And then he says it here that depuis le moment de la mise en vente, and then 17 septembre. But the funny thing is that I will show it in another letter. The one that was actually responsible in Paris to put it out, the series says 18 September, so it was probably 17 or 18. And then the last photo is actually in the Register of Donations. The Register of Donations of the British Library, and then you can see that it was actually recorded by the administration of the British Library on September and October 12, 1872. It was a funny way of recording. So they had these headings: August, September. It was around that time that Marx received it, and then donated it to the British Library. And then here, that was what I was saying about 18 September, probably the first series came out. Because he says it here: enfin, j'ai pu mettre ce matin la série en vente à l'heure qu'il est. En dan zegt hij meer, he says, sorry, it was in Dutch, 4 o'clock in the, I think it's in the evening that he says here, yeah. So it's probably 17, 18 September. This is the handwriting of just Vernouet. You see, it's a bit similar as the one of Lachâtre, actually. Kind of similar. He was responsible in Paris to, as he says it, he was the gérant de la librairie of Maurice Le Châtre, because he was as a refugee in San Sebastian in Spain. So that was the first series, and then we go to the second series. I'm just going to briefly document it. So it's also important to know, because the second German edition was also published around this time, and then it's interesting to see, especially if you want to compare content, what was available of the French edition, what was available for the second German edition, to know what is the possible influence of the two editions. So then we stick with installments 6 to 10, every time 5 installments. Register of Donations also recorded it on February the 22 of 73. But yeah, that's when he donated it, so that's when he received it and then went to the British Library or sent it. But we can know it's around 17 February that it was put out, as Just Vernouet said, for example, here, that he would receive a second series of Capital, and that he hopes to send him the third one in the photo here, the right photo. He says it, Just Vernouet. So both series were around the middle of February 73 out, as you can see here. So that's 73. Basically, we always say 72, 75 is the edition of the French edition that it came out. It's basically mostly a 73 publication. Most of the series were put out in 73, and then a huge part in 75, and a little bit in 72, but 74 had no publication of the French edition. The third series, and that's installment 11 to 15, as you can see here, the entry 19, that it was in the Register of Donations in the British Library, and he submitted it as I said, in March 73, February, so around the same time as the second series. And then we go, this is a slide to show that they really stuck with the 5 installments per series. As they stuck with it, he says it here in the printing, the tirage of the last deuxième série, livraison 6 à 10. So they stick with it the whole time until the last series in 75. Then they did a change, we will show you. But he speaks also in the second photo here, that's the second letter of Le Châtre to Marx, 22 of March 73. Then he speaks of 5 series of 5 installments, so they stick with it. And also here in the last one, he speaks about that they need still the installment 26 that will go into the 6th series. So that's again a series of 5, so they stuck with it. It's important to know when it came out, so unchanged plan of 5 installments per series. And also, Marx sent those installments to friends and colleagues. The first letter is Borgheim, is someone that he also submitted installments, and he on the 28th of February was the letter dated, and he says, Dank für die dritten Lieferung des französischen Capital. So he already received the third installment, the third series, of the French edition. Around that period, as I was saying, the middle of February it came out, and then he sent it around. And also the second series, so you see that in the right letter, 11 February 73, he speaks about the second series of the French translation, that he says that it was just published, documents the publication date of both series of 5 installments. Then we go to the 4th series, installment 16 to 20, Register of Donations, recorded page 121 to 160 on July and August 9 of 1873. It's not an exact date, that's how they recorded it. And also Engels to Zorge, who lived in the United States. So he received letters from Engels on the 26th of July. And then he says here that Marx für die Lieferung das Kapitel, he would send it, nachsenden, wenn nicht schon geschehen, from the French translation, are already 4 installments out. So then around this time, the 4th series was already published in July 73. The 5th series, 21 to 25, Register of Donations also recorded around the time of, October and November the 8th, that was then recorded. It's a bit later than it was probably published, because we know from letters that Marx didn't yet receive the 5th one, while the Just Vernouet here was already talking about the 6th series. So the date was a bit earlier that it came out than when it was received in the Register of Donations. It was recorded in the Register of Donations. So Just Vernouet says here, on imprime en ce moment la livraison 27 à 32, ce qui nous permettra de mettre la 6e série en vente. So he speaks about the 6th series, and then funny Marx then sent to Just Vernouet, like, yeah, you're talking about the 6th series, but didn't receive any 5th one, because Marx was entitled to receive some copies of every series. And then he says here, thank you for reminding me that I didn't send yet the 5th one. So it was before 26th September that this 5th one came out. Then the 6th series, that's an important series because it's part of the famous letters between Marx and Engels on the French edition, that they had a bit of a discussion on the quality of the French translation. It was installment 26 to 30. It was certainly after 26th of September 1873, because this is the letter we just discussed of Just Vernouet, but it was certainly before 29th of November, because we know it because Engels replied to Marx that he read it yesterday, a French chapter on factory laws, as he says it here. That's part of the famous letter where Engels says, this French edition is a bit not up to standards. He has a discussion, we'll discuss it later. Then the remaining installments, they were published all together. So 31, 44, they all came together in November 75 after a long struggle with, as Noémie said, the court-appointed administrator, Adolphe Quest. It was a difficult process. It was ready, the last installments, but then there was a struggle with the court-appointed administrator to put it out, and eventually it came out in November. So here he speaks about the remaining installments here in this letter. We're already in 20 July now, 75. He says it here, the printing of the last livraison that are left to publish. And that this is a letter of the administrator that was appointed as a head of the company after the whole Paris Commune. Then he was actually appointed by the government, and he had every different excuses to not put out the remaining installments. He said that there was not enough finances in the library to publish the remaining ones. But then finally, as we see it in this letter, then he says it here that he would receive the last installments today, the 15th November 1875. He says it here below, that he has received today that the last installments. You can see it in the last sentence of the letter, and signed by Quest and Plantes. And then here finally, because Marx probably sent out of Quest a letter, we don't have the letter, that he didn't receive yet the installments. He was entitled to get it. And here Adolf Quest says, sorry, I didn't know that I actually had to send this to you. And then Marx then received his 100 copies of the last installments around this date, 25th of November. So we know that is the final date of the publication. So if you check it, they always say 72, 75 is the publication of the French edition. It started actually in December 71 with the meeting of Lafarge and Laura Marx in San Sebastian, They were all refugees, kind of the Paris Commune, and they met this Paris editor, and then they sent letters to Engels and to Marx, yeah, we have this editor, he really wants to publish this French edition. Marx wanted to publish this already a long time before the French edition. He found it really important to publish it in French. And in this letter of André Graspi of the Russian archive, we can see it here that he says it then to Engels here. Engels is called the General, they had two kind of nicknames for each other. So, mon cher Général, en même temps que nous, Mort recevra une lettre de Laura, and he summarizing the conditions of the Paris librarian to publish Das Capital. And he speaks about that the conditions are not fantastic and not really exceptional also. But yeah, there was a bit of discussion. It was not fully optimal of the conditions, but they anyway accepted it. So this is the letter of Paul Lafarge to Friedrich Engels, 12 December 71. There was also a letter of Laura Marx to her father, also interesting. So we know from December 71 to November 75, there was a conception and completion of the book itself. And then we go to the publishing contract. It was dated the 30th of February. This is important to know why we actually have this French edition with 2 columns and this installments principle is because it was also discussed and agreed that we had to publish it. That they had to publish it in 2 columns and the fixed with some price and 8 pages of the text per installment. You see here a handwriting and the contract that was signed by Le Sartre and Marx, and saying that they accept to publish it. There was a discussion in advance also that he even listed his August Philips, part of his family, actually family of the Philips industry actually. That was the reason why the book looks like this actually, why it has these 2 columns and with those footnotes below. There's also was a discussion about these footnotes, why they were so long, and there was difficulties here and there. And this is then the letter, the famous letter that people use. That they publish that actually in most editions. Certainly also the Penguin edition, they published it where he actually says Marx that he's actually he finds it good that the translation is being published in these installments, periodic installments, because it would for him, and we will discuss it later, it would be more accessible for the laboring class, and for him this consideration was the most important one. Well, was really important. And then it was a good side of the medal, as he said it here. But the promise, it's a piece in pieces, and people would maybe walk away from reading the book because it's in pieces, and that might have been a problem for the reader, as he says it. And anyway, he says it here that it's important that people can read it. So he found it really important that it's accessible for the reader. And then also the other side where you see the importance for Marx of the French edition is in the reader's notice of Avis au lecteur, was dated 28th of April 1875. And what we'll discuss is again this postface, because here is a kind of he gives a bit of a qualification of the book, but he's also he stressed that it's a really important edition, independent edition. Here's the translation. He says that whatever the literary imperfections of this French edition, it has a scientific value independent of the original and should be consulted even by readers familiar with the German language. And he also stresses that there are simplifications, but also additions. He says here that, in the first sentence, that Roy really, he wanted to make a translation really as exact as possible, even literal as possible, and that he has really done his task in this way. But then, because of he also had to modify the edition, Marx says, to make it, as he again says it, to make it more accessible to the reader. And he says, of course, because this was done day by day in different time moments and moments of his life, and it was published in installments. And he says it ils ont été exécutés avec une attention inégale et ils ont dû produire des discordances de style. So some style differences in the translation itself. But then he says it needs to be, you cannot just ignore the French edition. It's, he says it really an important edition. You need to see it. You need to consult it. You need to include it. And he actually has said it. First, this we see that in the first installment. That's why it's important to stress that it's a series. It's in the first installment, 17, 18 September. He had many difficulties with changing the translation. He really spent lots of time with changing the translation himself. We have actually more information that he worked on the French edition than that he worked on the second German edition. This should be also stressed. We have many more letters or texts that he actually worked on the French edition than that he worked on the second German edition. As we see here in the first installment, 17, 18 September 1872, he stresses that it's entirely revised by the author, and it's in the very beginning of the publication, actually, that he stresses that. Just to continue, that about the edition, here is a letter that he wrote to Friedrich Adolf Zorgen again, 21 June 1872. And then he says again, I really entirely revised it. It's the beginning, 21 June, before the publication, before he put it in on the title page. It's in the very beginning of his revision, because he got the materials around May, April. We document in the book that he had a lot of trust in the translator. He didn't yet have access to translated material of his own book. He really trusted him, the translator of Feuerbach. He really trusted Joseph Roy. And basically then when he received the material around May, then he saw, this is not what I wanted, and he kept revising it until it was good. There was a funny process of proofreading in the beginning. Around August, he received the whole material of the translator, and then he always kept fully revised it and sent it to the translator in Paris. And he calls it Teufels Arbeit. It's like the labor of the devil, really difficult. And you see here the handwriting below. He put it really in a big font, Teufels Arbeit. And he stresses it, entièrement révisé par l'auteur. And again, about the importance, we see again in the afterword, and this is before the postface, 24th of January, published, he says it again. Nevertheless, in revising the French translation published in Paris, I now found that some parts of the German original would have required more thorough reworking here, greater stylistic correction there, or even more careful elimination of occasional oversights. And he says it here. This is also a copy of in Berlin. So that's just the translation of it. You can read in the original book, the second German edition, the last German edition that he published of the volume 1.
Yes, and to continue regarding the topicality of the capital, of the relevance, and why it is important to actually go into reconstructing the publishing process. I think what is important to highlight is that Le Capital has been the focus of lots of praise, but also lots of criticism. So in the side of the praise, for example, some famous Marxist scholar, sociologist Kevin Anderson, he emphasized that actually Le Capital is no mere translation. Not only did Marx, in editing it himself, make more precise many basic formulations, but he greatly expanded some sections. So here he basically says, we cannot just take it as a translation. We need to consider it as something that adds, certainly in certain sections. So if you want to read Das Kapital, you need to also read Le Capital in order to understand different nuances of the work of Marx. And then we also find, and maybe that's the more prominent thing from in Marx's scholarship is the criticism towards the French edition. And in this case, we have, for example, here a quote of Jean-Pierre Lefebvre, that was the translator into French of the second German edition, right? Of the fourth German edition. Yeah, but is a translation of the fourth German edition. So basically, what happens in France, for example, they read Marx in French, but they don't read the French edition that he put out, but they read the translation of Das Kapital into French. So then Jean-Pierre Lefebvre is the translator from German into French, and he writes in the preface the inadequacy of Roy's, the translation of Le Capital, of Roy's translation was an irreparable starting point. So here we see that both in the praise and in the criticism, the weakness and the strengths of these editions are related in the way in which this edition was published. So in the way of the writing, the translating, the editing. So as Kevin Anderson said, this is a really interesting edition because Marx edited it himself. He added things. So he's talking about the publishing process. And then on the other hand, we have Lefebvre, who says basically this is the main problem of this edition is that there was inadequate translation of Freud, and this makes it an unsatisfactory, basically, version of Das Kapital. So we have these both weapons that basically say, okay, it can be good, it can be bad, but are related to the publishing process. The problem is that in Marx's scholarship, there is few attention to how the publishing process took place of Le Capital. And therefore, we cannot know whether this praise or criticism has a place or has any ground. So it was one of also of our starting points for the discussion and for the elaboration of this book, that we need to understand how it took place in order to understand what is the value of this edition. And then we also have some other works that have focused on the reconstruction of Le Capital, and these are related to, for example, Émile Bottigelli, Jean-Pierre Lefebvre, that we already mentioned, François Guadin, that were recently with the new sources. And then these are mostly in the 20th century put out. We were limited to the available sources, and as Kenneth already highlighted, nowadays we have more sources, and also, so the addition of this book is that we not only consider the new sources that were published in 2019, 2020, just recently, but also we consider the new sources that were under use. So of family members, for example, from August Phillips for the time of the contract, but also of the daughters and the wife of Marx. So this book basically tries to put together all the available sources up to the for evaluating Le Capital.
So the contribution of the book is then we are this process. So focus on this Marx. So the book contribution is the examination of the publishing process without a sole focus on the correspondence of Marx and Engels alone. Because if you read now the correspondence, it's always Marx and Engels writing letters, but the correspondence received is not or you need to read more specialized literature. So we try to expand it and include correspondence from other connections. Previously overlooked, so there's relatives, friends, people working in Citrus company, because many letters are also misclassified. Because sometimes they thought that that La Chatre received some letters that were actually addressed to people working in Paris. You get a completely misclassification of letters if you read the recent literature. Or yeah, that's basically that. So if you can only identify them if you connect it with other correspondence, and you see actually that people are corresponding to each other and not to wrongly classified people. There's also sometimes a wrong translation of letters, so it's important to read the original letters in the language that they were written. For example, in the English translation of the letters, there's a completely wrong translation of letter, as if Marx was sending materials. There's a letter in the document in the book, so you can only see that if you read the original ones, and that's what we try to do in this book contribution. And also we show that it's really a family and personal endeavor of the book. For example, his wife read materials of the book, his daughters read it, the son-in-laws corrected it because they were French actually. Charles Longuet and Paul Lafarge were native language French speakers. Marx is a good French. His French was really, really good because he lived also partly in France, and he also was really highly educated. And his French is really good, I think. But here and there some funny things, but he could write really well in French, I think, and especially explain himself. But then he also needed help. It's not that he did everything alone. And that's why in the book we contextualize the whole book from its inception until its completion. There was also a history before the book itself. The Capital, I mean the book published by La Chatre. There were some endeavors before the book itself to get it out in French, but that was not the focus of this book itself. Just to say, so chapter 1 is just the introduction. Chapter 2, we connect the circumstances of the Paris Commune under which this French edition came to exist. It was really important for the French edition, the Paris Commune. It gave new possibilities for publishing in French, new connections. The way the Commune shaped the process was really fundamental, I think, not only content-wise, but also how it came out, contact with the editor, then it had to be in this way, this form. How we have it is also partly related to the Paris Commune itself. Chapter 3 then is about the first series of La Capital. The choice of the translator was really important and complicated many things. Although I think Marx would never be really happy with any translator. He would always revise it. I think it would always be something that had to be revised, I think. And there were translation problems. He had to correct it. He was not happy, lots of work. In the beginning, his health was still good, but then it really went really badly, his health. And yeah, it's also important to know this publishing process for example, why the second volume and the third volume were not published. I think he spent until 1875 with his first volume again, and he got in contact again with his own work. He had to translate it once again. He had to correct it. He was confronted again with his own work, and then it was 75. Then he died in 1883. It's not much time left to continue everything. It's certainly important to also know why it took so long, to understand why we don't have more volumes of the book itself in a more finished format. Then the next chapter is on the other series. It's the longest chapter of the book. The problems continued, and we explain why, after the publication of the first series, why it took so long. It's the biggest chapter of the whole book. Chapter 5, we showed actually the overlapping between the second German edition and the French edition. And actually, we secretly describe the publishing process of the second German edition also. So it says it's about publishing La Capital, but also it's actually also the second German edition process is fully described there also. And then you see that Marx was also busy with money and all this and that. So that was also part of the discussion in letters with the German editor. And then chapter 6 is the status of the French edition in the eyes of Marx and Engels. and then the possibility of actually using this version for further versions of Volume 1. So we will try to show that various choices the editor needs to make, in our opinion, when you want to make a Volume 1. So, and Chapter 7, just a conclusion. And the appendix is the discussion of a specific copy of the French edition with newly changes. And we will now focus further on Chapter 6 with some new additions. We will focus on the Spanish versions, the two that we identified, that are based on the second German, and the other one on the third German. With some, here and there, some comments on the French edition, when the editor felt it suited to speak about it. So what we already said, actually, for Marx it was an important version because it included additions, but also simplifications. He stressed that without any problem that there were simplifications in the work. He also, as we showed it in the reader's notice, he stressed both that it was an important version and that it has simplification additions. There could have been possible style changes because of the different levels of attention that he spent on it. And also in the afterword of the second German, he said that it's an important version. And before, he also wrote this postface and also in the French edition, the postface. He had this conversation in 1974. The context of this letter, he was actually going to Karlsbad in Czechoslovakia, where he went to a spa, and then Marx, he was saying, I'm going to spa, but wait a little bit because you will get the final materials. And I added here and there some important new developments, which will give, so the French edition, as I shall incidentally point out in the afterword, a value not possessed by the German original. He says it really clearly in that letter. And he wrote it when he was going to Karlsbad in a spa. And he wanted to maybe buy some time for himself, like I'm going away for some time, but you will get something nice in return. Again, here about the importance of the French edition is repeatedly stressed by Marx. I don't know of any letter or material that he said it was not important to use. So the Danielson was a person in St. Petersburg that published the Russian edition of Volume 1. There he wrote in English, I hope you have received the first part of the second German edition, which I have sent you a few days since. I also sent you the first 6 installments of the French edition, which will be out in a few days. It is necessary to compare both editions because I've added and changed here and there in the French edition. That's already 15 August before the publication of the first series. Again, to much later, 20 January 75, he says it here that to Oppenheim, there's someone living in Prague that he visited also when he was in Karlsbad. It was a friend of him, and then he visited Prague. He has some correspondence about this. He says that he altered a lot and added a lot, especially in the final sections of the French edition. So there's the section on the accumulation process. There were some huge changes there. He says it here, da ich viel verändert und viel zugesetzt, namentlich in den letzten Teilen der französischen Ausgabe. This is the last sentence. So he stresses it again, 20 January, and then again in a letter of 11 February to Lavrov, someone in Russia, that published also an interesting journal in Russian. He says in French, although Marx could also, I think, write, he understood Russian, he studied the Russian. He says that the first series, he says it again here, first 6 series contains changes, and the unpublished parts contain the most important alterations. But he also stressed that the first 6 ones were also really important. You see it here below, the last sentence, that he says it here, that it contained interesting things, and also the ones that were not published yet. He says it here in the last sentence, 11 February. And then again on the importance, 4 April 1876. There he speaks about it, that especially the the whole part of the accumulation process was wesentlich verbesserd. So it was a huge change in the content. And he wanted that he read it and gave some comments. Then much later again, in 1880, Marx met some American correspondent, John Swinton, when he was again at the coast in England. It was published in the Sun, September 1880. He says here, by the way, in referring to his Capital, he said that anyone who might desire to read it would find the French translation much superior in many ways to the German original. Of course, we don't know that it was said in this specific way, but we do know that he sent him a copy of the French version. So that's interesting. He sent it, as we can see in this letter for November 1880, that he have sent you today a copy of the French edition of the Capital. So yeah, he's still talking about the importance of this book so many years later. And a funny side note that his daughter actually ripped out the portrait. There was a portrait in the French edition because it was seen as a caricature. So there must be somewhere a copy of the French edition with the portrait ripped out. Then one of the last slides, the importance of the French edition. So to a famous letter to Zazulich, the Russian correspondent, and then he is actually referring again to the French edition. As you can see here in the middle, Le Capital, édition Francés, page 315 in the middle. So he actually cites himself to a Russian correspondent from the French edition, because there's an important thing there that he cites, the long discussion that he has here about where he uses the French edition. So again, in 1881, he uses it. And yeah, if you want to know.
Yeah, so also, as we said, there was the drive of Marx to render a French edition that was reader-friendly. And reader-friendly meaning that should have been cheap. So if we see the letter to Laura Marx, there he stresses that in every respect this needs to be a cheap, popular edition so that the working class can have access to it. So that was one of the main drivers. Then if we continue regarding the correspondence where he stresses the reader-friendly version, to Sorge, who wanted to put out an American edition, he says, every day I have to correct the German proofs of the second edition of Capital and the proofs of the French translation in Paris, which I often have to rewrite completely to make matters clear to the French. So he wants to always, or he stresses in the publishing process that he's rewriting in order to make it much more clear to the French reader. So for him, there were some passages probably in the German edition who were less accessible to the general public. And he says here in the French edition, I want to make the matters much more accessible. And then in this letter of 1872 to Sorge, he stresses also that this is not an exact copy of the German edition in the reader's notice. Finally, and I think the most important thing in the letter from Marx to Danielson, he says that he wants to make a version tailored to the French public and workers. Right? So this is also in the context of the Paris Commune. Actually, there was in the correspondence with the editor a discussion of what would you prefer, and he stressed always, Marx, that he wanted a cheap, popular edition that is accessible for the workers. So this is also the context in which he put out the French edition.
Marx also didn't ignore that it was a difficult procedure that he had to do because he had to completely revise the whole material. As he says it here in a letter to Danielson in 73, und daher bleibt der Art zurechtgeflickt ist immer Stümperwerk. So this patched up work will always stay as an amateur job because he has to revise it. It's not done by a translator in one go. He had to check it, had to revise it. So he knew that that was a difficult process that he had to do, and so he was also, but it's partly also what we can read in the post phase that he says discordances of style and all that. So it's partly of he knows that there are some differences, literary differences, but still he would stress the importance of the work. And he also stressed that it's translation worthy. For example, to Danielson, the letter that we already showed, it was suitable for translations into other languages. He says it will be all the easier later on to translate a book from French into English and the Romance languages. So that was his opinion. Quite early in the process of the French edition, in 28th of May, I think it's there. The last sentence, yes, is there. The last sentence there, he says it from French into English and the Roman languages. So I think Spanish also. It would have been easier if you use it in the French edition to translate it in Spanish. And this continues, this translation worthiness, as we call it, when there was a discussion of a possible American edition by Zorge. They wanted to put out some American edition that never came about. It never came about, this American edition in Marx's lifetime. There was a discussion. He got this letter from this is from to Danielson about a second Russian edition. They wanted to bring out a new edition in Russian, and then Danielson asked him, you have this French edition, and then what do we need to do with the second Russian edition? How shall we proceed? And then Marx clearly stated that he wanted a merging of the second German and the French editions. We will read it, the passage here. He saw them as complementary, not as one that is better than the other one. They were, in some senses, yes, but we will discuss this. He saw them as complementary, with sometimes the German, sometimes the French edition, as the basic text to actually translate. And this is a letter of 15 November 78. So here is actually the transcription of this specific letter. He says it here in regard to the second edition of the Capital. So I beg to remark, the second edition of the Russian edition. I beg to remark, he says it, that we set the divisions into chapters, and the same holds good for the subdivisions we made according to the French edition. Do that the translator compare always carefully the second German edition with the French one, since the latter contains many important changes and additions. Though it is true, I was also sometimes obliged, principally in the first chapter, to aplatir. So I translate this as flatten. You could say that it means also smooth out, as someone says in the recent literature, the matter in its French version. I think he means here flatten, if you read it in the context of the letter. So he found that in the first chapter it's a bit more flattened, more simplified, I guess. And he says also here in the third part of the letter, some changes I consider useful. I shall try to get ready for you at all events within 8 days, which didn't happen, 8 days. When Marx says, I will send you something in 8 days, will probably be later, so that I may dispatch them on Saturday next. Today is Friday. And then the next letter, so he then sent a new letter to Danielson about this second Russian edition. He says the two editions so needed to be compared, save the changes which the translator must make by comparing the second German edition with the French one. Only very few alterations are necessary, which we'll find later on in this letter. Here he says only very few alterations are necessary, but you need to still compare both versions. He also added some changes that I will show you in section 1 of the second German edition and section 5 of the French edition, that he was actually already revising his French edition again. in 78. And he also wrote in that letter that the two first sections, so that's the commodity and money and the metamorphosis of money into capital, he says that they are to be translated exclusively from the German text. So that he says here for the Russian edition. And here, just fast, we'll not go into it, he has some small notes, like the changes that you need to make in the second German edition. And also here in the second part of the letter in chapter 16, there's a passage that he says that needs to be struck out, as he says it. And he's already revising his French edition in 78 already. And then the second time he says something about translation of his text. But this is about a possible American edition that never came also. To Zorge, he said that the translator should compare the second German edition with the French edition, in which I have included a good deal of new matter and greatly improved my presentation of much else. This is 77, a bit earlier than the Danielson letter, I think. Yeah, it was earlier. Yeah. And then he also said to Zorge that he would give him a French copy that was never found. They don't know. Thomas Kozinski has tried to find it, but that copy is not being found. That was sent to Zorge. And he would also give him a list to show, as Marx said, where the French edition shouldn't be compared with the German, but the French text should be used as the only basis. So that he also says, and then he fulfilled that promise. He sent to Zorge the list of changes. So he says it here, at the same time as this letter, I'm sending you the enclosed manuscript for Douai. Should have been the translator of the American edition that never came about. In case he's doing the translation of Capital, the manuscript contains, besides a few alterations to the German text, indications as to where the letter is to be replaced by the French edition. In the copy of the French edition intended for Douai, also dispatched to your address today, the above mentioned passages in the manuscript are marked. So interesting, the Marx list asks for the text division of the French edition. That he says that needs to be used. Also here in the letter of Zorge and the list. But contrary to what he then later wrote to Danielson concerning the second Russian edition, he called for another change in the third chapter, so in the first section of the second German edition, where the French edition had to be used instead of the second German edition, and all the other changes in the final list that he sent to Zorge were from section 3. So he sticks with that original idea, kind of, that the first two sections need to be exclusively from the second German edition, but he has still some change here in the page 96. This is the list from the Pole Affairs Archive, actually what he sent to Zorge, how intensively that American edition had to look like, all the changes that had to be done to this second German edition. He had this really detailed final list. He has also two drafts that don't fully overlap. We need to, because he also was, he was often sick, as we can see here. He said to Zorge that he had an influenza, a cold, and you can see kind of the traces, I think, in this list, because there were some interesting changes in his draft that he didn't include in his final list, so that's also something remarkable. And then we go to Engels' views. More negative than Marx's views on the French edition. So, as we already said, he read his chapter of La Capital. So, we also need to contextualize it. Why did Engels write a letter to Marx if they were actually living in London at the same time? It's because Marx sometimes went to this pass for his health that was not so good at the time. And then, because of this situation, they actually can send letters. They send letters to each other. They will not send letters to each other if they're distant, if they're close to each other. So that's why we only have this conversation between Engels and Marx on the French edition. Only then, because they were just not in each other's vicinity. And then we have this discussion. Otherwise, we would not have this discussion. They would have this private discussion most likely, but. So thanks to that Marx needed to go to Spa, we have this letter. And he read a chapter, and it refers to chapter 15, so the 6th series that was already out. It was not in a draft yet, it was already the finished the finished version of the text, was not proofreading that he was doing. And then there's a translation, and I'm just going to read it. It's really insightful how Engels looked at it, at this French edition. So he says, with all due respect for the skill with which this chapter has been rendered into elegant French, I still felt regret at what had been lost from the beautiful chapter. Its vigor and vitality and life have gone to the devil. The chance for an ordinary writer to express himself with a certain elegance has been purchased by castrating the language. Maybe this is a bit of a reference to La Chatre. Castrating can be maybe. It is becoming increasingly impossible to think originally in the straitjacket of modern French. Everything striking or vital is removed, if only by the need, which has become essential almost everywhere, to bow to the dictates of a pedantic formal logic and change around the sentences. I would think it a great mistake to take the French version as a model of the English for the English translation. In English, the power of expression in original does not need to be toned down, but ever has inevitably been sacrificed in a genuinely dialectical passages can be made up in others by greater energy and brevity of the English language. And then Marx' response, he was still in his spa. He got that letter, it's a bit aggressive in my opinion. Like, this text is not good, this French edition, especially the part he was reading. And he said, Engels, please read on, you will find some interesting passages, keep reading. Although he didn't comment on the linguistic things. And then Engels agreed, he responded and said, yes, there were some improvements in the book, in the text, but that has nothing to do with the language used. Up to now, I found that what you have revised is indeed better than the German Engels wrote, but neither French nor German has anything to do with it. Best of all is the note on Mill. So John Stuart Mill, that he's referring to, and that refers to the last two pages I identified of chapter 16, plus-value, absolute plus-value relative, page 223. So that passage is not in the corresponding second German edition. And this is what I just said. That you just need to continue reading Marxist Engels. You need to continue reading. You will find some interesting things in this that are, as he says it, that are better than in the German edition. He says it here in this letter of, I think, 30 November. And that is what I just said to you. It's about, that it's true, that's interesting, it's good, but it's nothing to do with any language. And then Engels continued with expressing the French edition as a flattened version of Volume 1. So in his correspondence and in the prefaces to the posthumous third German and English edition, he says that the third edition, it is a letter to Zorgen actually, the third edition of Capital is causing me a tremendous amount of work. So that's after the death of Marx. We have one copy in which Marx follows the French edition when indicating the emendations and additions to be made, but all the detailed work remains to be done. I've got as far as accumulation, but here it is a case of revising almost completely the entire theoretical section. On top of that, there is a responsibility, and then he says it, Engels, for to some extent, the French translation lacks the depth of the German text. Marx would never have written in German in that way. Moreover, the publisher keeps pressing me. So for Engels, the French version should not be evaluated in the same way as the German version. In the prefaces, he talks about the smooth French or plain French of Le Capital, and then Marx's terse German. And in the preface to the English edition, he says that the French text has been referred to in most of the difficult passages as an indicator of what the author himself was prepared to sacrifice, as he says it, wherever something of the full import of the original had to be sacrificed in the rendering. And that's an interesting thing. He got some passages, letters that Marx sent to Danielson, and there he got also the passage of the aplatir, the flattening that Marx sent to Danielson. So Engels knew, probably he read it from the letters also, he saw it in letters of 1885, so he saw it also. What Marx wrote to Danielson, as we see here, that the aplatir sentence is below here. It's Engels also knew it in 85, this letter in extract. from Danielson. The prefaces, again, we see here the French flattening that he wrote in the passage in 86. Because then Engels got the notes also that I just showed you for an American edition, and yeah, he still speaks about this French Verflachung. Then, if you want, about the Commonweal. So Engels also wrote about how not to translate Marx in an article in 85. And then Engels says that to translate such a book, a fair knowledge of literary German is not enough, because Marx uses freely expressions of everyday life, idioms of provincial dialects, codes new words, takes his illustrations from every branch of science, his allusions from the literatures of a dozen languages, and you must be a master of his. He says it German and German life, you must know this. But also you need to be a master not only of German but of English too. So French is not needed, I guess. It's not mentioned at all. The French version in this article of Engels, how not to translate Marx, is responding to some translation of someone called Broadhouse. He says it here: powerful German requires powerful English, and you need to have the best resources of the language. He says it. And he criticized then that specific translation that was then available. Yeah, so you can see it here. You have a specific skills to translate Marx. So you need to have a solid knowledge of spoken and written German, and you need to pay attention to the consistency of the terms according to Engels. And also of the language into which the book is translated. It's not mentioned any French language skills or the French version is not mentioned. In later correspondence to Italian people, 1893, he says that translating volume 1 is very difficult and demands of the translator a profound knowledge of the German and of political economy. And he says it, here the translation from the French edition alone wouldn't be perfect, as the Italian suits more the philosophical style of the author, he says. Although, as we saw, Marx saw that it could have been used for an Italian translation. Engels was not of that opinion. And then the letter, finally, 1893, the French edition is more popular than the German one. And he says that the greater freedom of movement offered by Italian in comparison to French, he says it. And we see both letters, they repeat a linguistic comment similar to the one Engels wrote to Marx in 1873. He felt that modern French was not ideal for the translation for the first volume, and he spoke about the linguistic limitations of French, and also about the consistency of terms in French. He was talking, and Marx a new German terms, as he was discussing in the Commonweal article. Then this is a new passage.
So about the editing and translating of the first volume after Marx's death. So there have been several posthumous editions of volume 1 that have been published. And what we want to also make aware the reader with this book is that these are not the same version as the one published by the author. So I think in many occasions we read the book and we think this is a version that the author put out, but this is not the case. This is the way in which Das Capital has been translated has led into different versions. And also, much more important, we want to highlight by this, certainly in the 6th chapter, that it's useful to compare the Marx's last 2 editions of Volume 1, the French and the second German edition. Also the first German edition, because all these editions are giving nuances into the work of Marx. So it's important to consider all these versions that have been put out. And we are also, for example, here, so for example, here we have the note where in the preface of the 2 German and English posthumous editions, Engels put out, as far as the study is concerned, Marx himself had thoroughly revised several subsections, and in them, as well as infrequent verbal hints, had given me the measure of how far I was allowed to go in removing English, technical expressions, and other Anglicisms. So it is true that it is important to consider the editions that were published in Marx's time, but also the ones that were posthumous, because probably Engels got oral instructions from Marx of how to proceed into the publication of further editions. So we find that it's important to consider all these editions and not just to put it aside. So after Engels' editions, other editors also produced new versions of the book. However, the challenge when bringing out a new posthumous edition is that the author cannot be consulted. In the case of Engels, he got some oral instructions, he got some notes, but right now we don't have that option. So the idea is that the editors are left with different notes, editions, and different decisions that they need to make. So if one edition is to be made out of these different versions and variants, a readable version without complexities might be preferable. And the problem here is that editors ultimately are faced with a choice between the different options that may involve important interpretative nuances. Here, according to the choices of the editor, it will be the kind of version that we will get of the book. And most of the times, as a reader, you are not aware of those choices, right? So this is something that we want to highlight.
So I will show you now some similar passages in the second German and French editions that cannot be easily reconciled in one edition without showing these variants. And there the editor of a book needs to make a choice if only one version of the text is needed. So here the table, I hope it's not too small. No. So here in the French edition, it's an interesting variant. It's similar in content, but a bit different. And for example, here he says that we first need to examine the movement of useful labor in general, abstraction made of every, let's say, particular stamp that is made by this or that economic phase of society. And if it's more lively language than if you see, for example, in the second German edition, where he speaks about the labor process needs to be now checked independent from any determinate societal form, which is less lively. If you read it, for example, in the Penguin edition, they have this, we shall therefore in the first place have to consider the labor process independently of any specific social formation. It's less lively than the French version. You need to make a choice how to combine it. You need to make a choice, or you ignore it, you use only the second German one. It's a choice you need to make. There is no other option. Similarity of content, different language, interesting. Of course, some will say, yeah, the translator, this may be the translator alone that has done this. Well, I would say no, because Marx really revised it in immensely detail. We know this, so we can really say that Marx approved the French edition as it was, especially the amount of attention he has given it in the years that he did. And the second thing is also an interesting change. Here he speaks about surcroît du capital avancé, so like a surplus of the advanced capital. In the German edition, it speaks about the valorization of the advanced capital difference again, valorization, advancement, valorization versus surplus. Interesting, be different. Can be interesting to how to combine it. You need to make brackets. You need to make it in a bracket or something and move it behind valorization, or you put it in a footnote. It's always a choice of the editor, you know. And these changes are not added in any of the editions. It's not there. It's, for example, in the Engels edition, he calls about the expansion of the capital advanced. And in the other one, he speaks in the Penguin edition. We speak about the valorization. So it's not based on on anything of the French edition, so that's not used. That's not even mentioned in footnotes. Only Kosinski has noted it in his apparatus of 900 pages of variants that he found between all the editions and the notes and all that. This is a book on itself, the variants. So these are nuances. You can choose only one, but then you will hide the variant to the reader, and you might close off some, because there are many other examples, you might close off text interpretations. So you need to make a final compilation of editions will involve a choice. You cannot avoid it, which means that there will be in the future, and I'm sure there are already people doing this, actually pretty sure, that there will be more editions of Volume 1 that will be produced with different choices. You can make maybe 100 versions of Volume 1 if you like, and you ignore this. You had there a choice, you delete the preface, you put a funny editorial comment here. You can do anything you want with this Volume 1. I think it's also, there's no copyright anymore on it. You can make your own version if you want. So, but anyway, I'm not against any translation, of course, or new editions. It's nice to have new editions and new editorial comments. But anyway, producing a new translation or edition of Volume 1, they will always involve specific choices. It's unavoidable. The following, and I have other examples that are even obvious improvements in the French edition that do not appear in any edition of the ones that I identified, the editions here. And yeah, whether or not to add these enhancements, as you might call them, there's also an editor choice. For example, here in the French edition, it's about the Labor Day, that it possesses a maximum limit, that it cannot be prolonged after a certain point. I'm now reading the French version, and this maximum limit is doubly determined. First of all, is it et d'abord? So first of all, by the physical limits of the labor force. And in the other editions, he doesn't express it so strongly. He says, eenmaal door die physische schranken der arbeidskraft. So it's just, as they translated it in the Penguin edition, first is less strong than say first of all. First of all is like, is the first, it's the first of all. This in the other version is less strongly phrased, is first, and then there's a second, a third, but it's not said that it's first of all or the most important one. So that's a change that is also not added in some versions that can be important to stress. And then here he has an improvement in his formulas that he's presenting in a chapter on page 229, the French edition. He speaks here about des espaces de temps, and in the German one he speaks about Zeiten, so times, as it is translated in the Penguin edition, times. In the French edition he calls it time periods. It's more exact, it's an improvement of the second German edition, because it's time periods, it's not times. What is that, times? I don't know. It's a time period, that it's a ratio of something. So that's an improvement that is not added. Yeah, you can ignore it or not ignore it. It's anyway, and everything is possible. In the letter, so the letters that we showed of Daniel Zorger, so he claimed that if you want to make a translation, you need, especially the second Russian and the American one, he said you need to merge them in some way, you need to compare it. Although the two proposals, we need to stress, is also are a bit different, but anyway, he wanted to merge them. It's of course also not inconceivable that after 1878, so the last letter of Tudor Nelson, that he might have changed his mind about merging versions. He was even at the end of 1881, he wanted to change the volume 1 completely again, so after his wife died, then he was not possible anymore, I guess. As he said, so there was a possibility to publish this third German edition. His editor asked it, and then he said, "Yeah, just publish then a number of copies." But he said he would have changed it at present under different circumstances. I might change the book in the way I should have done at present under different circumstances. So, but that was never achieved. This revision, and then so I want to challenge the idea that the German edition should always be the basic edition to which text can be changed and added. There was a post by Marx with regard to translations for the second Russian and American edition. In those situations, you saw a more complicated relationship between the two editions for a translation. And also the idea that the French is, and perhaps maybe the first edition, the German, are minor versions. I think that's inaccurate. They're all versions of the same volume 1. And actually he worked really long on this French edition, longer than on the second German edition, by the way. He already sent half of the book in, I think, April 72, was already sent to the publisher. We know this from letters that he got from Meisner, this German publisher. He worked much longer on this French edition. I'm not saying that it's better than the German edition. For me, they're all versions of the same book. And perhaps for a German version, he would have, of course, start with his German edition. He would not, I guess, start from his French edition. Then you can use it as a basic text. But if you can see, if you take these instructions for the Russian and the American one as important, then I think we should take it into account what he wanted. It would make a more complicated edition than just translating a second German edition or a fourth one. Anyway, it's a choice of an editor today. What shall we do? I'm not going to attack any choice, although I found it strange that you would go against the author's intentions without a good argumentation, let's say, with a strong argumentation. For translation, I think it's less easy to argue, in my opinion, to ignore a French edition, for example. But anyway, what I think is needed in scholarship on Volume 1 or Marx, a clear and transparent version of Volume 1 in columns where you have all the variants, because it's not only the second German edition, it's also all kinds of notes and comments that you need to give to people to read. Only one readable text, hopefully, in columns or something. Chekhov references can be added with like Engels. Engels versions have interesting checks of different things. Kozinski's version of Volume 1 is really interesting. I recommend it. There's a reference work also. And for me, ideally, and I think Noemi also, ideally, variants should not be hidden, but made public for readers. Everything should be allowed, that people can make interpretative choices, and not make an editorial choice. You try to make an hegemony, maybe, of a certain way of proceeding. The authority of editors, what to do with it, which editorial notes, end notes added. Then we get all kinds of different Volume 1 versions, different choices, different end notes. It becomes really confusing. And that already started actually with the English edition, the choices between the editions. That should be made more transparent, in my opinion. Then the Spanish version, we will try. I just wanted to show the changes that we showed in the table.
Maybe it's worth it to say that, so the idea of Marx was that the translations into Romance languages were based on the French edition, but in this case, both the Spanish versions that are available in Mexico of Fondo de Cultura Económica and Siglo XXI are made based on the German edition. And therefore, it's relevant to highlight that. But then we can see that because they use different German editions, they also have different, for example, the titles are different. No? They are kind of similar, but yet different choice of words. And some of them, for example, as you see in the chapter 5, we have proceso de trabajo y proceso de valorización, but we don't have the subtitle el proceso de trabajo. That is footnotes. There is also like footnotes where there says the fourth edition is really included, but we are based on the second edition, so we do that. But sometimes you don't have these footnotes, so you don't know whether there was another subtitle there or not. You just read it and you assume that it's like that, published by Marx. There is other examples, for example, in the chapter 7. It was the title, or was it the...
this is just, I again the example that they basically translated only the German edition. Huh? So the left, I think, left is based on the fourth German edition, and the right one is the second German edition. And yeah, they don't include any of the changes I just showed, just as a funny thing. Huh? So here again, we see here the last sentence. I think it's, again, the process of labor is abstracted from the, what is it here? Forma social determinada. So it's just, again, the shortened version of the thing, not the French version. And that's just here. There's nothing here of the French changes or something.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, this again, just based on the German materials.
So basically, both texts are based on the German edition, even though will have made more sense to have it from the French edition.
Yeah, here and there are some footnotes or something. There's in the French edition something of interest or
but these are choices of the editor when to include or when to highlight that there was a difference from other editions or from other translations. So the reader has like a kind of patchwork somehow of the book.
Yeah, that was actually just to show this. I think this was the Times change. Let's see. Yeah, I think it was also based on the.
Yeah, and then also the terms, right? Plus valor, plus valía. So there are different choices that an editor, which is probably like normal, but the problem here is that they sometimes take from different editions, and even though they say we were going to translate from a certain edition and argue for that, then they include other things, and the reader is not aware of these nuances and differences. So here is just to have an illustration.
Different language, so if you compare it, it's different. Different Spanish.
Yeah, different words. Yeah, of course. Yeah, different terms also.
I see express and present and represent.
Mm-hmm. So there are just different choices which are relevant to take into account. We see that we are kind of really long, so maybe we should give the word to to Diana to comment further, and I think we can then listen to some questions.
Well, okay, I'm gonna speak in Spanish. Well, I think it's easier for the public, and I hope to be clear. Well, yo diría en primer lugar que no estoy de acuerdo con esta apreciación sobre las ediciones en español, porque ciertamente en ambos casos se basaron en la segunda edición alemana, pero la edición de Wenceslao Roses efectivamente estuvo prácticamente traducida de esa segunda edición, pero la de Pedro Escarón, que es la más conocida, demuestra lo bien traducido que fue el Capital al español. ¿Por qué razón? Porque Pedro Escarón, en el aparato crítico introductorio, señala que él va a utilizar la segunda edición alemana corrigiendo los errores que cometió Roses, gracias al contraste que hace también con la edición francesa. Y les voy a poner un ejemplo de uno de los que ustedes también recuperaban. En la edición en francés era algo así como l'excédence de valeur, la traducción de lo que en alemán es, y por eso lo buscaba, lo esclarece Escarón, Mehrwert o Mehrarbeit o Mehrprodukt, que en alemán es eso que al español le tradujo como plus valor, plus trabajo, ¿no? Y corrigiendo lo que había hecho Roses, porque Roses había traducido esas cosas como valor excedente o valor excedentario, y eso se parece más al francés. Y en el español, como en el francés, el excedentario nos da un contenido semántico que aproxima más a la idea de que es un sobrante y no un valor agregado. Esa es la ventaja del español sobre el francés sobre ciertas cosas. Por eso la edición francesa al español sigue siendo muy cuestionada, porque es como, hay otro debate muy clásico entre la traducción al francés y la traducción al español, y uno de ellos es el concepto de enajenación o alienación. En francés el término es alienación y en alemán Marx utiliza dos términos, Entfremdung y Entäußerung. Entonces, el problema es que el francés tiene mucha más, digamos, tiene una complejidad semántica para ciertos conceptos que el español no carga. Por eso la edición española tiene una cierta ventaja relativa a la hora de traducirse directo del alemán que la que habría si se hiciera directo de la edición francesa. Por eso es que el mal juicio continuo sobre, y esa que en el texto ustedes recuperan muy bien muchos momentos, ¿no?, de esta continua como ir y venir del propio Marx, en la que juzga que la edición francesa no le acaba de gustar tampoco. Ahora, yo creo que el tema es que el Capital, como él mismo dijo, quería ser, dijo Marx, ¿no?, iba a ser como la obra de arte total, o sea, ni Wagner, ¿no? Que eso iba a ser el Capital, pero la realidad es que el Capital, Marx traza cuál iba a ser su contenido. Iba a tener una parte que iba a tratar del Estado, que iba a abordar el Estado, que estos primeros capítulos de estos 3 volúmenes que conocemos solo eran la primer parte del gran proyecto, ¿no? Y entonces, pero Marx pareciera que se enfrasca en la necesidad de que ese primer volumen del primer capítulo de lo que conocemos del Capital quede perfecto, porque efectivamente había una intencionalidad que él mismo declara en el prólogo a la primera edición en alemán, y dice: procuré hacer esto lo más accesible posible. Y entonces uno lee la teoría del valor y dice, bueno, pues le echó ganas, ¿no? Sí le echó ganas. Pero en realidad son categorías muy abstractas, es una teoría muy compleja. Pero la magia del primer volumen del Capital radica en lo que él mismo describe, ¿no? Él dice, voy a empezar por describir la mercancía, porque la mercancía es la forma inmediata en la que se nos presenta la relación social capitalista. Entonces, por eso debo empezar por la mercancía. Si el libro se llama El Capital, pero no voy a empezar por explicarles el capital, voy a empezar por explicarles lo inmediato. Eso ha llevado a algunas interpretaciones clásicas que también ustedes trajeron ahora. Las lecturas clásicas que se dieron en francés fueron las de Maximilien Rouvel y la de Louis Althusser. Y en su libro ustedes recuperan algo muy al inicio que a mí me pareció importante. Ustedes dicen que van a tratar de argumentar explicando la dinámica de la publicación, ¿no?, y el proceso de publicación en la perspectiva de contribuir a entender la trayectoria intelectual de Marx. Y yo creo que eso es muy importante porque la lectura althusseriana, ¿no?, que se dio del Capital, suponía esta famosa tesis de la ruptura epistemológica, el corte epistemológico entre el joven Marx y el viejo Marx. Y el debate no tenía que ver con la vejez y con la juventud, ¿no? Tenía que ver con que para Althusser solo en el Capital encontrábamos las categorías científicas explicativas del comportamiento material del capitalismo. En ese sentido, para Althusser, lo que pasaba en las obras de juventud, entre las que se encuentran los manuscritos del 44, las tesis sobre Feuerbach, y de alguna manera la ideología alemana, es que estaba sobrecargada de categorías filosóficas, digamos, especulativas, ¿no? Y en cambio lo que encontramos en el Capital son categorías de orden científico, social y económico, como plusvalor, plus trabajo, plus producto, ¿no? Y en su obra ustedes recuperan algo que yo copié porque me pareció muy importante como ejemplo para esta relevancia que tendría esas distintas ediciones. Por ejemplo, un cambio de términos que recuperan en el libro que me pareció muy interesante es que en el capítulo 1, aunque no lo encontré en la edición en español donde estaba, pero en el capítulo 1 dicen, por ejemplo, Marx utiliza bedingen, ¿no?, cuya traducción al español sería determinación. Y en alemán pusieron dominer, es decir, dominación. Si nosotros traducimos y el fragmento que recuperan es el modo de producción de la vida material, determina o domina, y es donde está la decisión de traducción, lo social, lo político y lo intelectual. Entonces, claro, la traducción que va y dice determina, te da un contenido absolutamente diferente que el que dice domina. Entonces, aquí ese es el gran tema, ¿no? El gran tema que tiene que ver con yo creo que finalmente el gran valor del trabajo que han hecho, que es un trabajo exhaustivo y muy interesante, tiene que ver con una reflexión que se está haciendo en el presente sobre cómo en la historia del marxismo en el siglo XX se ha hecho, estamos ante la necesidad también de reflexionar sobre cómo recibimos y cómo interpretamos el pensamiento crítico, porque eso tuvo un impacto de orden estratégico, de orden político, ¿no? Y eso es lo que me parece muy importante. Estamos en un periodo en el que se están produciendo muchos estudios de este tipo en este caso sobre Marx, pero sobre algunos de los grandes autores del pensamiento marxista o crítico del siglo XX, y que tienen que ver con recuperar cómo se les recibió, y eso pasa por cómo se les editó, cómo se les publicó, cómo se les tradujo, porque además demuestra algo que me parece a mí de enorme valor y que tiene que ver con las redes intelectuales que esto producía. Cuando ustedes destacan en el libro y ahora en su exposición el lugar que ocuparon Laura Marx o Jenny Marx, madre e hija, o Paul Lafarge, que escribió El derecho a la pereza. Cuando ustedes recuperan todos esos, lo que están mostrándonos, y además en el libro que lo hacen, creo que lo hicieron con más énfasis que ahora, también el entramado que hay de un tiempo en el que no existían las editoriales académicas. Piensen eso. No es el tiempo de las grandes editoriales industriales a las que estamos acostumbrados ahora. No había que pelear por el open access, ¿no? Ya se trata de editores, traductores, ¿no? Aquí en el libro lo recuperan súper bien, ¿no? De este Maurice Lachatre, que es el que va a hacer la edición francesa, que apuesta por publicar El Capital en francés. Es una apuesta un poco suicida. Estamos hablando de 1871, es la Comuna de París. Eso en el libro lo describen ustedes de manera, creo que fue la parte que más me gustó, acepto. La primera parte, es decir, todo el contexto que tiene que ver con cómo un editor le apuesta a publicar al hombre al que conciben como el ideólogo detrás del movimiento obrero más radical del momento. Y dicen, ¿por qué no lo edito, no? Y luego los traductores eran una belleza, eran procesos verdaderamente increíbles. Efectivamente a Marx, ustedes lo describen también muy bien en el libro, ponen muy bien cómo Marx decía, ¿qué onda con este traductor del francés? Me está traduciendo súper gacho, ¿no? Sí, me está traduciendo mal Roy, o no sé cómo se pronuncia, ¿no? Y entonces me está traduciendo mal, pero luego ya después en la segunda, porque además lo que nos explicaban hace un momento con tanto detalle es que la edición francesa fue por entregas, como las novelas francesas, ¿no? Como si hubiera sido Víctor Hugo, así por entregas, ¿no? Y entonces así lo hacen, yo creo que siendo fiel a cierta tradición editorial francesa, y al público francés, a ese público lector. Y entonces Marx en esa primera tanda, digamos, dice, me está traduciendo espantoso, me está aplanando, no sé si esa sería la palabra para el flatten, me está como aplanando, me está adelgazando el contenido. Y luego la segunda nos explican muy bien en la segunda tanda como que le mejoró. Pero algunos de estos, otro traductor del que hablan, ahorita no recuerdo el nombre, pero otro traductor del que hablan, que estaba como pensado que podía ser el traductor, era un excomunero. Es decir, y cuando uno piensa en un Wenceslao Roses traduciendo al español, estamos pensando en traductores, que no son traductores que cobran por página o que cobran a las grandes editoriales, son traductores militantes, que están traduciendo como animales, ¿no? Porque Roses tradujo todo lo que pudo del alemán al español, ¿no? Todavía Escarón, bueno, ya pudo cobrar al siglo XXI, ¿no? Pero Wenceslao Roses no. Es decir, y es ese contexto tan increíble el que a veces se nos fuga, el que se nos va de las manos, y cuando hacen todo este trabajo de recuperación de las cartas, pues nos da un contexto intelectual increíble, ¿no? Porque yo no le daría peso, digamos, a Jenny Marx o a Laura Marx o al propio Paul Lafarge en el contenido del texto. No, Solo Engels le entendía a Marx, es la verdad. Por eso es su gran interlocutor, es el único que le está entendiendo realmente y el que le puede decir, aquí estás, es lo que le dicen algunas, está súper abstracto, nadie te va a entender nada aquí, le dice Engels, ¿no? Pero ellas más bien intervienen en el asunto de apoyar las redes, o sea, de servir como redes. Lo describen en el libro maravilloso, en el libro dicen, si no es porque Paul Lafarge y Laura Marx conocen a La Chatre, no se edita a lo mejor en ese año El Capital en francés, y lo conocen en ese ambiente de esas redes militantes intelectuales. Y ese Marx que conocimos todos que fue bien pobre, ¿no? Durante mucho tiempo. Entonces, cuando ponen y documentan hasta el acuerdo comercial, uno dice, pues sí, ¿por qué no le querían pagar más al Marx, ¿no? Por publicar eso, pagarle más al traductor. Entonces, yo creo que el valor de un trabajo como este, más allá de estas minucias, o sea, yo me pongo purista porque me gusta mucho El Capital. Y entonces digo, yo creo que la edición al español es una edición que tiene un enorme valor porque logra en español algo que creo que en francés muchas veces no se logra. Y esto si lo comparamos incluso con el alemán. El alemán de Marx es un alemán muy sencillo, si esto puede decirse del alemán, ¿no? ¿A qué me refiero? Porque escritores en alemán muy complejos de traducir son Hegel en filosofía o Walter Benjamin, son muy difíciles de traducir. Marx no es tan difícil de traducir si lo ponemos en esos niveles y si hablamos de que es alemán, ¿no? Pero Marx tenía un tipo de escritura, y sobre todo se nota en El Capital, en la que intencionalmente procura ser sencillo. Y el primer volumen del Capital es como que te van llevando de la mano, ¿no? Marx como que te toma de la mano y te va llevando para decirte, te voy a explicar qué es esta cochinada del capitalismo, ¿no? Y entonces por eso es que esta labor tiene efectivamente que ser muy precisa a la hora de tratar de volcar esto. Pues sí, traducir es traicionar, ¿no? Pero sí se puede lograr una labor de este tipo, y por eso creo que una investigación como la que han hecho abona sobre todo en el ámbito que nos permita reconocer, ¿no? Que quizá la lectura que sí se hizo de Marx durante mucho tiempo fue una lectura determinista, positivista, economicista, y que eso no estaba en Marx, ¿no? Que eso no estaba en el texto de Marx, que eso fueron efectivamente traductores, editores, pero sobre todo, diría yo, ahí ya no le echaría la culpa tanto a los editores y a los traductores como a los intérpretes, ¿no? Y entonces, por eso es bien interesante, ¿no? Todo esto, y vuelvo y con eso cerraría porque es todo mi comentario porque voy a tener que salir corriendo, el contexto de la comuna. En el libro sostienen una tesis que me gustó mucho, ¿no? Sostienen la idea de que se ha pensado que la Comuna de París de 1871 frenó ¿no? la progresiva publicación del Capital en francés. Y la tesis que sostienen, que me parece maravillosa, es que al revés, que la Comuna de París acelera el proceso y la necesidad de la traducción del Capital. Y creo que me parece una tesis que se sostiene muy bien, cuando menos en los argumentos que presentan, porque claro, digamos que hay aquí a ustedes también se les juega una decisión interpretativa, diríamos, en la que sopesan el hecho de que, explícita o implícitamente, sopesan el hecho de que algo que el propio Marx y la teoría de la historia que tiene Marx habría explicado, ¿no? Que es la sociedad la que demanda explicaciones para el proceso que está viviendo, ¿no? Entonces, de alguna manera, es que el movimiento, es que la comuna se está armando, ¿no? Están tomando París, están construyendo esos procesos que hoy llamaríamos autonómicos, ¿no? Están armando esa cosa increíble y al mismo tiempo necesitan teoría que les explique lo que está pasando. Entonces, a mí la tesis que ustedes sostienen ahí me gusta mucho porque le da un peso, creo yo, interpretativo central al hecho de que lo que acelera la cosa es la demanda de la clase obrera organizada que se expresa en la comuna. Y Marx dice, claro, es que es esto. Y además, por supuesto, ¿no? El giro que le trae también a Marx. En el creo que primer y segundo capítulo ustedes hablan también de la publicación de la lucha de clase en Francia, ¿no? Si no mal recuerdo es ahí. y hablan de cómo Marx en realidad está pensando el orden de lo político, y es ahí donde se da cuenta de esto, ¿no? Pero claro, la vida se le empalma, y se le empalma la segunda edición, como ustedes explican muy bien, la segunda edición alemana con la edición francesa. Al mismo tiempo querría seguir avanzando en la construcción del capital, y el movimiento obrero va más rápido que él, ¿no? Por lo tanto, y la vida, ¿no? Y la vida de un hombre que ha dedicado lo mejor de todo a meterse a tratar de explicar esto. Pero bueno, si pudiera cerrar, decirles que creo que el enorme trabajo que han hecho vale mucho la pena en la construcción de esa, de no solo de ese momento, ¿no? Sino también del abonar a esa lectura que tenemos que hacer hoy, de cómo queremos críticamente enfrentar la interpretación y la crítica de la economía política. Y por otra parte, también decir que creo que yo, en beneficio de la traducción al español de Scarón, la de Rosas es muy bella, pues, ¿no? Pero sí le echó mucha crema a sus tacos, ¿no? Y entonces yo les recomiendo la explicación que hace Scarón de esto, porque en algunos momentos dice, vean cómo aquí se le pasó la floritura, ¿no? A Roses. Y entonces de pronto decía cosas como, dice, en los modos de producción paleoasiático antiguo, ¿no? Cuando en realidad la traducción es en los sistemas de producción de la antigua Asia. Entonces, la carga cultural que le metió, ¿no? Yo sabía que a ustedes esa les iba a gustar. Entonces, pues Scarón hace un gran trabajo, y creo que eso habla bien de la enorme labor que se hizo en la edición al español, aunque hoy por hoy sí habría la necesidad de que trabajos como el que ustedes han hecho tan exhaustivo abone para una lectura de un aparato crítico que bien, ciertamente debería acompañar todo eso, aunque Scarón le echó muchas ganas. Bueno, muchas gracias. Y yo, si se quedan a preguntas y respuestas, yo me voy a tener que ir, pero les agradezco la invitación y disfruté muchísimo la lectura.
En lo que se va Diana, porque quiero que me oiga, Wenceslao se murió trabajando en una segunda edición de la traducción, y es la que sacó el fondo hace poco, trabajada por un asistente de él. Sí, sí, y bueno, ahí luego le echas un ojo y me cuentas qué opinas de la segunda versión de Wenceslao. Bueno, pues muchas gracias a las dos y a el uno. Muchas gracias por este trabajo súper interesante. Pero bueno, no sé, ¿cómo ven? ¿Tienen preguntas, comentarios? Bueno, yo tengo ya después de lo de ustedes y luego de lo de Diana, pues ya se queda uno, bueno, ¿y yo qué voy a decir, verdad? Pero eh, se me hace súper interesante esta parte de la Comuna de París, precisamente, de cómo Marx siente que es la impresión que me dio y que me comentaba también esta Daniel que se fue temprano porque se tenía que ir. Ella es traductóloga, ¿no? Y comentábamos un poco, ¿no? De cómo Marx está deseando simplificar aún más, hacer el capital para el obrero. O sea, está pensando en quién debe ser su lector, y está buscando que eso sea todavía más comprensible de lo que ya era. Y bueno, no sé qué piensen de esto. Y la otra cosa, pues ya nos amolamos, ¿no? Yo creo que o no sé qué opinan ustedes. ¿Será posible hacer una edición, idear una edición que pudiera combinar estas cosas. Ustedes hablaban un poco de poner columnas, ¿no? Y comparativas. ¿Se podrá hacer eso? Sería maravilloso que lo hiciera. O alguien, ¿no? En fin. ¿Alguien más quiere comentar o preguntar?
Fusion, I don't think it exists. That was actually the start of the project, was making column by column editions of the variants in one thing. And then I came across, of course, the first edition. You get fast variants, take the editions. And then my question was, how much is this Marx's edition or is it the translator's edition? And then I found out was it 2020, that there was new letters coming out in 2009. And then I got new letters again in 2020. Then I came to the idea, maybe I should check all the publishing process and see if it's really Marx's edition. And then based on that, I would like to continue my columns thing. That was my project. But then I stopped doing that in September because I found there was a possibility, there was an unintentional consequence of my action to then make this history. And also I always wanted to make something about Marx, but not something ideological or political. So I wanted to also make an historical work with all the sources available, see all the sources myself. But to answer, the ideal version would be like a column version. Kosinski was actually doing that for 20 years. Thomas Kosinski, that recently died. We had some interaction also by email. So he was doing this version, his own version. He had all the variants, and then he made his own volume 1 version. It will also be translated. Someone is translating it in English, I think. The German version of that they have. VSA Verlag, Kosinski, Thomas Kosinski. For him, that was the ideal version that he made, I think. He was really tall with his apparatus, with all the variants, and it's 900 pages or something, just with variants. Marx was continuously changing his mind also with things. So we don't have I think we don't have a completed volume 1. And an ideal volume 1, I don't think it's easy to make. As in the recent English translation, it was called, the first version, Methodological black box. The first version, because it's different and all this and that. For me, it would be a column version. Like, for example, in Charles Darwin, on the Origin of Species, there is something online where you see all the variants in scan, so you get the facsimile. Because I also don't like that you can not see the book itself, because it's you see the I like it a lot. Actually, the format of the book itself, it's full of these funny drawings and cartoons. Let's see here. So it's nice to have it next to, let's say, German edition. It's and then with the changes in some footnote, extensive, page by page. Of course, I stopped doing my comparison until section 3 of chapter 1, because that's a completely. Somehow Thomas Kosinski was able to make an errata of that, like an comparison of that section, because he was actually putting in the appendix of the first edition in a new text, and then he had a new section in one. So that will be difficult to put in one column next to each other.
Because it changed the section. It's like impossible to next to each other, because you have like a totally different look. So it cannot be like shown like that. So it's really difficult, I guess. I think it might be maybe online easier to visualize than printed, and I think that's the main problem. But it will be ideal, of course, also in the spirit of simplification and accessibility for the people, that are not a specialist, maybe it is also good, the other versions. And I think what we wanted to highlight at the end with the Spanish version is not that it's not a good version because it's not based on the French edition, not at all. It's just that there are variants. So as you see, what you can read from siglo XXI and Fondo de Cultura Económica is different. And just that, and when you buy it, you don't expect it. You expect that you will get the same text you just have maybe another font or maybe bigger or, like better quality of paper, but you don't expect that the content itself will change. But it does change. And that's the thing. It's not about that the Spanish translation is not good. No, that was not the goal of what we are presenting here. What we're presenting here is not that one version is better than the other. It's just that there is a plethora of versions. And when you get the book, you will get a different version. And now there is a new English translation, which is different from the other one. So this now is in Princeton. There was one in the Penguin edition. This will look different, and we need to be just aware as the reader, like as an informed reader, you need to be aware of such things. But this is not something that we're aware. And besides that, what already Diana highlighted, the fact that there is that the way in which it took place, the publishing process is related to an intellectual, specific intellectual context and climate that allow it. And that's really, really important. So yeah, we didn't highlight it so much in this presentation because it was too much information. But yeah, our second chapter, basically, it's about, the context of how it got published this and how it is related with the Paris Commune and how the Paris Commune actually at some point facilitated the possibility of printing this, putting out this French edition that Marx, by the way, was already for a very long time trying to put out and was not able. But then now, after the events of the Paris Commune, he is able to do it. So just contextualizing and also contextualizing how other, the networks of contacts of Marx also came to contribute at least in the publishing process. As Diana says, maybe not in the content itself, but yes, in the publishing process, it was really clear at some moments how they contribute either with proofreading or just finding out the editor, which is already, or the translator, which is already a great deal. If we imagine also that Marx was in London and the editor was in Spain, so how to put together these people? So, and then they came together in San Sebastian by luck, the daughter and the son-in-law from Marx, and then there was that created the possibility actually of having this French edition. So it's, I think the thing that we get is like this is more complicated. Volume 1 is not that there is just one volume 1. There are different versions of volume 1. And they are all worthy. This is important to understand that maybe if we take it more seriously in Marxist scholarship, then we are going to be able to have more interpretative nuances. So there is implications also for the content. But yeah, we don't go into it. We let it that for other people to go into it. But here we just contextualize and try to recreate the whole publishing process in order to give the framework for the other things.
Yeah, it's not a criticism of the French edition.
No, of the Spanish edition, no. And actually, we don't, because we are also not specialists on the translation and all those things. It's all are, I think, valuable. But just it renders a different sense, no? When you get determined or dominated, you already get this. This is the example that we also put in the book. This is totally different, and it also shows different marks, because I think as we were discussing to the presentation, there is this idea of Marx as a determinist, someone who has a specific idea of how it works, the history and all these things. But when we go, especially also into the French edition, we see that this is not the case. So there is much more nuance.
Yeah, just editorial choices most of the time.
Yeah.
There will be more translations. It's infinite possibilities.
As we see, it will not stop. We don't think that. But it's important to know that just we can get different versions, and just we need to take it like that.
Yeah, more translations, as we said in the slide, is good. That makes it more accessible.
Also, there are the two sides of the coin, right?
Well, muchas gracias. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, and it's really interesting. And I guess I don't know what I'm going to do to read the Das Capital.
I think you will need to read different.
Various ones.
Presentation to problematize the book. That's just like it's better to go to the source and then still use the Spanish. It's all good, but you can always go back to the original in German, French, and then and the notes. There are so many notes that he made, and there's so many. And also he commented on popularization of his work, and then he actually commented, but that is mistake what you write here. I mean it like this, and then you can add it also in the interpretation. Like on the Dutch popularization, there was one. There's a German popularization, and their notes in those copies, he was really interested to see what people did with his work. So they wanted to make shorter versions of his work. And then he read it, and he made small comments in the margins, like, no, this is mistaken, wrong popularization, or then he commented. So that's also interesting. You can put that also in those columns or in the footnotes. There's so many, because now English translations, they make it from a certain interpretative choice, maybe even theoretical interpretation of the work, and that's, they sneak it in the translation in endnotes, like, Marx meant it like this, or for example, the old megas, Marx Engels Gesamtausgabe, they were written in the time of the Soviet Union, they were funded, and there was this funny Erläuterungen in their books, with funny explanations sometimes, really politically influenced of the day. And this in every book, of course, you cannot escape from the historical context. It's better to just leave out those notes, and where they put prefaces of their own, the editor or the translator, and then they steer it in a direction. And that was already from the start. For example, how was his name? Pareto, the economist, the famous economist. There was an edition, and he had like a long introduction where he was saying, what is this? Criticizing it, and that's already in front of the book. Other authors have a more extreme, like Emil Durkheim, for example. Like, you need to read, there's this introduction of people like Stefan Lux attacking some parts of interpretation. Well, I would say just skip it and read the original and framing the just leave it as it is. And
well, thank you very much again. Y muchas gracias por estar aquí. A quienes no están aquí, pero que sí están aquí también. En línea.